In this video, we're going to be talking about place value. Now, place value can be a little confusing to those who have forgotten how to do this or those who are completely new to the concept of place value. So by place value, what I'm talking about, if I give you the number 1000, it's talking about the meaning of each individual digit and where they're placed in the number. Now, to make this make even more sense is let's throw in a decimal and let's add a couple more zeros after that. So not only are we taking into consideration the placement of the digits that come before the decimal, we're also taking into consideration the meaning of the placement of the digits that come after the decimal. So the easiest way to begin breaking this down is if I were to give you 1.00. Now, another way of writing this is just to say the number 1. But when we're dealing with measurements and dimensions and all sorts of stuff that come into play when we're fabricating and reading blueprints, it's important, or sometimes it's important to include a decimal and either 1 0 or 2 zeros behind the decimal, so that way whoever is reading the blueprint knows that it is a definite single 1. Now, if this isn't clicking just yet, imagine if we were to throw a $ in front of it. Now, does this make a little bit more sense where 1.00 can be written as $1 or 1? So let me go ahead and rewrite that. So just remember, $1 is the same as writing 1. Now, if I were to say 1.10 or $1.10, so let's look at the meaning of the 1 and the 0 that comes after the decimal point. So the position one space over from the decimal is called your tenths spot. So what this means is that when we take a whole number 1, it's broken down into 10 pieces. Okay, or 10 parts. So we can think of this as $1.10, or excuse me, if we think of this in terms of money, 10 pieces or 10 parts of 1, it would be dimes, right? So 10 dimes equals $1. And if we only have 1 dime, we can write it as we can write it like that. Some people who are a little more old school might remember it written like this, but we won't worry about that right now. Let's just go ahead and concentrate on writing it like this. So this is the equivalent of 1 dime, or let's write over here, 1/10. So just remember that when we're thinking of the digit that is immediately to the right of the decimal point, this is telling us how many tenths we have of a whole, or how many dimes that we have out of $1. All right, so let me go ahead and rewrite all of that. All right, so now let's give you something else. Let's say I've got let's say I give you 99 cents. Or let's write it as just a regular 0.99. So remember, this is the 10th spot. So right away, this tells us we have 9 dimes or 90 cents, right? So what about this spot right here? What's this second place to the right of the decimal point called? This is called the hundreds spot. So what this is telling us now is if we were to take one whole and we were to convert it to hundreds, we would have 100 parts. Or 100 pieces. So 1 is broken down into 100 different smaller parts. So what 0.99 is telling us is that we have 9 tenths plus 9 hundredths. Or we can just think of it as we have together 99 hundredths. And so this can be written as 99 over 100, or 0.99. So there's a little bit of a pattern to this. All right, and for the last place, I'm going to give you is the third digit to the right of the decimal point. Now this one I can't really explain in terms of dollars and cents because we don't go down to this small minute measure of money. This is the thousandths place. So with this, if we ever see something in the third digit place over from the decimal, what this is telling us is that we're breaking a whole number 1 into 1,000 pieces, or 1,000 parts. So if we just see a 0.001, this is telling us that we have 1 over 1,000, or we have 1 part of 1,000. So this is breaking it down really small. This is as far as we're ever going to go as welders and fabricators, because it gets really difficult to measure thousandths of an inch with your typical ruler. This is where we start getting into calipers, micrometers, stuff like that. But just know if you ever get into smaller units of measure than the thousandths, that is typically your machinists, your engineers, stuff like that. Typically, as welders, you'll seldom ever come across working with thousandths, but you never know, and it's always good to have this information committed to memory should you ever find yourself in this position. So just a quick recap. We know that if you have something to the left of the decimal point, that is a whole number. So we can say 1.00 or $1 is the equivalent of 1. If I were to say you have 10 cents or 0.10 of a dollar, that is equal to 0.1 or 1/10. And if I were to say you have 1 penny or 0.01, that is the equivalent of saying 1/100th. Or 1/100th. And then coming over to the thousandths, if I give you a 0.001, that's saying you have 1,000th of an inch. So I went ahead and I rewrote all of these different equivalencies. So hopefully this helps. I'm going to give you a really quick example. I'm going to give you 1.3. So we know everything to the left is a whole number. And now when we're thinking of terms of this position, we're thinking of tenths. So if I were to dig a little deeper into this, I would say you have 1 whole plus 3/10. Okay, so you can say 1 plus 3/10 of a whole. That's one way of looking at it. Now let's say I gave you 1.33. So we've got 1 whole, we've got 3/10, now we've got 3/100. So a long way of saying this would be I have 1 whole plus 3/10 plus 3/100. But we don't really want to lengthen it to this point. We want to keep it short and simplified. So when you have this second placeholder, you're no longer really thinking about the tenths, because as a whole, you're now focused on the hundreds. Okay? So the correct way of saying this would be you have 1 plus 33/100. And let's go with one more example. Let's just say I give you 1.334. So again, we've got 1 whole. We can say that we have 1 plus 3/10 plus 3/100 plus 4,000. But just like with the hundreds, we're now taking into consideration the entire scope of the placeholders that comes after the decimal point. So the correct way to say this is I have 1 and 334 thousandths. Okay. So basically I have 1 and 334 thousandths of an inch. And that's basically it for place value. If you still have questions, feel free to reach out and I will do my best to address all of your questions and concerns.